attention to is, let's look at some more advanced, what we'll call advanced Ericksonian strategies. Now, yes, definitely storytelling and things like that. But what I want to play with is the premise of what you just talked about before, where you're just having a chat. That's what you're narrowing it down to. You're just having a conversation with somebody, and people are walking away having spontaneously changed some aspect of their life. And again, this is what Erickson was known for. So I want to touch on this, do the mechanical version of it, and really turn what you're doing into just a chat. Now, I can't stress the blatancy of that anymore, because you're no longer doing hypnosis. You realize this. You're no longer doing the step-by-step strategies. You're no longer sticking to what's written in the textbooks. You're no longer doing what every other hypnotist is doing. You are essentially having the same chat as everybody else, but it's doing something different for them rather than just a conversation. Now, that's a level of expertise I think not a lot of hypnotists will ever reach, but it comes down to, again, as I said before, it comes down to how you think as a hypnotist, not what you do, not necessarily what you say, but how you think first, because we know every conversation we have, every word we use, every sentence structure we put together starts off as a thought. So when you come from a place of setting up your mind that it's so hypnotic and you can make anything you say trance-like, that's a new kettle of fish we start to work with.
Yeah.
So let's look at this mechanically. It was often said that someone like Erickson, especially the storyteller that he was, and he admitted it himself, that there was nothing trance-related. He wasn't doing the classical of saying, well, he did start this way, the classical of saying, close your eyes, and then he would overload them with information, or he'd have them stare off into the distance and overload them with information, then eventually get eye closure and things like that. So he went through the very mechanical version of hypnosis to reach a level of expertise where he turned around and said, I don't do inductions anymore. I don't do anything hypnosis related. What I'm doing is having a conversation with somebody. So in order to get there, let's look at the mechanical versions of what he did and start to put that into our conversations as well. So the place I want to start with is Erickson's setup. Now, you're familiar now enough with our priming setup. So the reason we prime is to set up the exact trance we want our client to go into. As we've stated before, there's two versions of trance we can put a client in, or two versions of the hypnosis we can put a client in. We can just put them into a trance through any means that we have and just hope that the trance they land, so to speak, in is full of everything they need. It's full of safety, it's full of breakthroughs, it's full of everything they need for the context of the session they're in. That's one version. Or, more favorably, we can put a client into trance based on their exact needs and our exact ethical needs as a hypnotist. Now, we already know the answer, which one's going to be best. We need to set up our trance accordingly so it has a wow factor every single time. We don't want to rely on hope. We don't want to rely on just our client will take all their happy thoughts into it, because we know if a client's feeling negatively or thinking unpositive thoughts, then they're just going to drag those things into them with them. Okay?
Yeah.
So...
And quite often they won't let that out initially. They won't let you know that those thoughts are sitting there.
Exactly. So if a client takes those into trance, they'll essentially just taint the trance they're going to go into. Now, we can't always get it 100% correct all the time, but what we can do is set it up the best way we can, is to set up all the parameters, all the boundaries, and allow the unconscious mind to put everything that this client needs inside of that trance. So when they do go in there, all that stuff's waiting for them. That's a very basic look of just my thinking around hypnosis. Okay?
Yep.
So we know when we're priming, just off the basics of conversational hypnosis, we know we're priming for things like safety, care, attention, focus, happy thoughts, if you will, breakthroughs, learning, healing.
Yeah, that they'll be looked after.
That they'll be looked after, yes. Everything like that turns our attention to something very, very positive. Okay? But what Erickson was starting to do, yes, he was doing that, but it was coming from a different angle. Now, the angles that Erickson was coming from is he wasn't just setting up the trance, he was setting up what I call the therapy strategy. Now, if you look over the history of Erickson, again, this is just what I think he did. It's very hard to pinpoint exactly what he did. because as he stated many times, he doesn't even know, he just does it himself.
Yep.
So the strategy I think he came up with was to not teach a client anything new. Now, for the 21st century, that's where therapy is turned to, and even the 20th century, was to say that a client comes in with very limited resources, and we put them into trance and allow new resources to take hold, to allow new resources to present themselves, so a client can move forward with new lessons. Okay, so always growing, always learning. What Erickson was proposing was to say that, well, if I've got a client sitting in front of me, I can guarantee that they've been through worse scenarios than what they're presenting to me now. They've had to do so many more things as far as learning and adapting to their environment and the life they live, even more so than what they're presenting to me now. And for a client to even grow up from adolescence into a child and childhood into a teenager and teenager into an adult, if they've gone that far, they had to have come up with so many different learning strategies and adapting strategies that can be brought back to life and attached to a new affliction. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Because when you look at, especially in the early stages, they've learned to do all of these things before they've understood a written language to any particular level.
Exactly.
Or a spoken language to any particular level. So a lot of that they've done the hard way.
Yes.
They've done it themselves. And if they were or were not fortunate enough to have some peer group support along the way, they're here now.
Exactly. And that's what Erickson's proposing. Instead of learning something new, why not bring up old learning strategies and allow a client to adapt to those, or allow that learning strategy to connect to the affliction they're having. Now, the reason I like this and the reason it's so powerful is because that learning strategy must have worked. There's no testing really needed, because if the learning strategy didn't work, the unconscious mind wouldn't have put it into action, or that client would have still had that affliction that it didn't work for. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's essentially going into the past, not for the sake of remembering a memory to understand the learning from it, but going into the past and finding a learning strategy that's strong enough and versatile and dynamic enough to attach to a present day problem. This brought to life the things like the regression style techniques. Now, while he was doing a classical regression, or regression was formed basically of what he was doing that was classical, is this learning strategy put into place is so dynamic, it allows a client to just revivify something that's old, bring it forward to something new, and testing's done for it because life's already tested the hell out of it, so it makes it very versatile. Okay? So
yeah.
In the fact of Erickson priming his sessions, even let's look at the more therapeutic times, is as he's priming his session, to feel comfortable, which was a classic of his, to getting the most from the session, and him looking after his clients, which is very classic with what he'd say. He'd also remind a client of things that they've learned in the past or done in the past that could possibly help them now. But he wasn't stating it outright. He was giving offhanded metaphors. He was giving scenarios. And he was actually revivifying a client's memory to bring forward those strategies. Okay. The classical one, and something used very, very often, and you'll see with a lot of his inductions, is to start talking about the complexities of what a child needs to go through to learn how to write or to learn how to read. Now, he can bank for sure that his client sitting in front of him had to have gone through or had to learn how to write or read, okay, in some shape or form. So his goal was to remind a client indirectly of the things they learnt as a child that are drastically more challenging than a client sitting in front of him saying, I can't quit smoking. I mean, think of the attention and the focus it takes for a child to learn how to write. It starts off just as straight lines or squiggly lines, and those lines turn into letters, those letters turn into the child's name, and you start to construct sentences and whatnot. So by reminding the unconscious mind, it's essentially we're saying to the unconscious mind, hey, you've done all these drastically more challenging things. Can you just do the same with this? Can you attach whatever you've learned in the past, go into your big bag of tricks, find a learning strategy, because that's all therapy is, it's a learning strategy, finding a learning strategy and apply it to this problem right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. And this comes straight into what I know you love to do, which is tell stories. Okay, so while clients were listening to these stories, he was actually telling stories not for the sake of just telling them. Yes, that was a big part of it, just to be interactional with his clients and get attention. But he's also implying or embedding, if you will, these learning strategies, and he's doing it repetitiously. Okay, so what we want to do is start to, well, how can we do this for our clients? What types of things or stories could we tell a client that would actually put into place the right trance and bring forward a learning strategy or a coping strategy that we can bring to life? We can highlight it, if you will, or turn the light on, to use a bad metaphor, and then allow a client to go into trance and just reconnect with something they've done in the past. Why teach them something new if the old stuff has already been tried and tested by life? And that, I think, is the genius of what he did. Okay, so let's think about this. Let's make a conclusive list, if you will, of things that a child or adolescent, maybe a young teenager, had to go through and had to overcome in order to be the person they are now. So I'll take my classical metaphor before, which was a child learning how to write or read. What other things to a child would have been so complex that we take for granted right now?
Oh, well, riding a bicycle.
Excellent. Now let's think of what it actually takes to ride a bicycle. What does it take?
Well, first of all, you've got to know what happens when you move your left arm forward or your left arm back. Mm-hmm. Right? So when you move your left arm forward, you're actually turning right. Mm-hmm. And when you move your left arm back, you're turning left. But the converse thing happens with the right arm. Mm-hmm. So they have to work together. Bit like your unconscious and your conscious mind, they've got to work together.
Exactly.
Right? And then you've got the fact that you're balancing on two bits that are about as big as a thumbnail each, right? Which is the bottom where the tyre hits the road.
Yep.
Right? And you've got to balance all your weight and keep that upright and not fall over.
There we go.
And you've got to know which way to move your legs in order to get the bike to go forward, and what you've got to do to stop.
Yep. So you think all of that just to ride a bike. Now, you and me, hopefully you can ride a bike, and I assume you can. We don't have to think about it, do we? But when we first learnt, there was a lot that went through our mind in order to make bike riding a function.
Absolutely.
Think of the complexities of balance. I mean, how do we learn how to balance? We're not told, we're not taught.
No, and our ears play havoc with that too.
Exactly. So
you've got all the sounds going on around you, and people barking orders at you, don't do this, don't do that, right? And you're trying to find your balance. So there's 600 muscles in your body that have got to learn how to all work together.
Exactly. Now, if we just take that analogy, and it's a perfect example of what I was talking about, if we just took the idea of balance, what it takes for a child to learn how to balance, and we present that idea over and over again, the way Erickson would do, we're revivifying the mind to say, you managed to help this person balance. I don't know how you did it, but you did it, and now you're sitting in front of me saying you can't quit smoking. You got to be kidding me. Learning how to balance. Think of someone who gets into a major accident, who has to learn how to walk again.
Yeah.
The strenuous activity of retraining the mind to walk again, or to even move the left leg and the right leg, is vastly more complex than stopping something like smoking, or getting over weight loss, or getting over a broken heart. And that's just one example. So to move forward with that example, what Erickson was fond of doing was to bring up a subject like that. Would be like learning how to read and write, maybe riding a bike, and maybe falling in love for the first time. Let's use those three. And then what he would tend to do is, as you did before, was present the idea of balance and then explain to his client, and this is the funny part, I think, and the genius, explain to his client in as much detail as possible what it actually takes to ride that bike in balance. You know, the left
because
foot needs to do this, the right foot needs to do that. You need to do this, you need to think of that. And that monotonous information becomes his overload for trance.
Yeah, absolutely.
By explaining every last detail down to the foot, the heel of the foot, the toes, how they all play a part in what the foot has to do to move that pedal, and how if you put some weight on the left leg, you have to transfer that back to the right leg, and that involves balance through the center of the body. And it would go into meticulous information about the art of bike riding that would overload his client, but would also remind the mind of what it took for that person to ride the bike in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So we can take things like learning how to ride a bike and balance. What else would be a daunting task to a child that we take for granted right now?
Being able to feel a way around while you've got no sight.
Excellent. Explain that to me.
So if you were to get up in the middle of the night and be able to get out of bed and go to the door to find the light switch,
mm-hmm.
you know, you've got to remember everything that might have been in the way before you went to bed.
Mm-hmm.
So all the toys and junk that you've left on the floor, right? Where something was in relationship to where you are now, and remember where that is,
mm-hmm.
and then get an understanding of how you're going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to place your arms out in front of you so you don't face plant with the wall when
Excellent.
you get there.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many feedback loops that come from all the different parts of your body
mm-hmm.
to keep you safe.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get over there, turn the light on and get some reassurance
Excellent.
as to you know what you were concerned about.
Excellent. So what do you think the common learning lesson is from walking around in the dark, so to speak? What's the things we rely on that are natural to us now, or natural to the body?
The feedback that we get from the surfaces that we touch.
Excellent. So let's take that. Now we go into telling a client what touch feels like. How do you distinguish between a wall and the carpet? How do you distinguish between the couch and a lamp or a table? Yes, they will have different touches. They'll have different feelings and different sensations when you touch them. Now we go into the task of explaining down what happens when each finger touches a wall, and how you know this is happening and that's happening, and how that helps you navigate even with your eyes closed or open, even when it's pitch black. And we can remind our clients through that we can walk around in pitch darkness and just base our navigational system on previous memory of how we've set up that room. I mean, what a task to learn something like that we all take for granted now.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's another great example. Let's go one more. What else do you think?
Look, I'm stretching to find one that encompasses lots of things.
Yes.
When the water goes cold in the shower and
Excellent.
You've got a face full of soap.
Excellent. So now we go into that storytelling of that, and we just the idea behind it is to bring up what is a universal experience.
Absolutely, because it's something, and I don't know, I don't know whether I've done this as a form of, you know, the classic rapport, so you've got some commonality with your client.
Sure.
So they go, oh yeah, that's just the worst feeling when the water goes cold because somebody's pressed a toilet down the hall.
Yes.
Right, and you jump, and then you've got a face full of stuff, and you're trying to adjust the taps, and you've got to know where they are.
Yeah.
It's, you know, you're out of your comfort zone, yet you know exactly where to go.
Excellent. Now, it's all of these learning lessons that we're having to experience consistently.
Yeah.
And again, the idea behind Erickson was to bring up a classical learning strategy, if you will, and have a client think about that, connect to it, and then in the background, or the side note that he's bringing up is, I'm reminding you of something complex you went through as a child, so I can just bring up that same learning strategy. Because at the end of the day, as I said before, therapy is just learning something new. He's just saying, well, instead of learning something new, quote unquote, why don't I bring in something old that's worked and stood the test of time and make it new again? Make it a new connection. Let's say he has found learning strategy number 1 has helped this person get over a broken heart, get their driver's license and learn to write their name backwards and frontwards. And he's saying, well, why can't it attach to smoking now? Why can't I use learning strategy number 1 to help overcome heartache? Why can't I use learning strategy number 1 to help overcome a trauma or a phobia? I mean, talk about smart.
Yeah.
Instead of going through the complex task of trying to figure out what is the best therapy. Now,
that's because we've got to name got to name things, and then we must use this tool for that name.
Yes.
Right? Rather than have a multifunctional one.
Yes.
That fits everything.
Exactly. And that's the place where Erickson has come from. Now, we're coming from a similar idea behind therapy, which is to say, we put a client into trance and allow the unconscious mind to heal them by just us being quiet or just us stimulating the trance, not adding our own thoughts, telling our client what to do. But even that tends to stump a lot of people. So if we were to use just the power of the unconscious mind to remain silent, if you will, while keeping them in there, we can also put in the Ericksonian thing, which is to use overload, which is classical information overload, when he talks about his story down into the minute details. But at the same time, he's not just telling a story that I see a lot of hypnotists do, just based on anything. Hypnotists think if I just tell a story nice and slow and very hypnotic about anything, it'll have the same effect. Now, while it can connect unconsciously, Erickson's coming from a place of, I'm going to tell you a story about you learning something because I want you to remember what that was like so you can learn from it again and again and again and so forth and so on. Okay? So in order to do this, we do this at our priming stage. We're not only saying to our client, so say our client comes in, we say, look, I'm going to look after you, everything's good, I'm going to make sure you remember this experience for a lifetime. And that would be our next transition into the hypnotic interview, which is to state, what's the problem, how does it make a problem for you, and we get into that interview stage. Now, before we even get into that, Erickson probably wasn't even big on doing the interview because he could read a lot from what people said to him at the start, was to start going into his induction, but also bring to life that learning strategy.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's give this a go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in as any client. It can be a smoker, it can be weight loss, it can be trauma, it really doesn't matter. And I want you to think of a learning strategy and then present it to me. And then I want you to go through the minute details of what it consists of, whether it's a function of riding the bike and balance, whether it's learning who's mum and dad and how to distinguish between male and female voices as a child. It could be learning how to fall in love for the first time and getting up the courage to ask out that boy or girl that you've spontaneously fallen in love with, and the thoughts that would go through someone's head, anything like that. And I want you to put in your storytelling ability and go through those details. Now, what's important is to include me in the story. It's not to say you're this person, but to offer ideas like, and I know you've been there before, or does that make sense to you, or this is, you're going to pull me into that story. Does that make sense?
It certainly does.
Excellent. So let's say I'm a smoker. Let's just use the classical, I'm a smoker. What experience do you think you could bring back to life that would help someone quit smoking? And then I want you to run me through the details, and let's see how we go with it. How much can you explain that learning strategy to me?
Okay. All right, Scott. So I just want you to know that that I'm going to look after you, and that you'll just feel a chair beneath you, know that you're safe, and that you're going to walk away with something that you've always had, which is, and that will stick with you for an awfully long time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you want to work on your smoking. How is it a problem for you?
Well, Michael, I've been smoking for about 30 years. I'm wasting a lot of money on cigarettes, and it's something I really want to give up.
What could you do if you gave up?
Well, I think I'd be a lot healthier, and the money I would spend on cigarettes, I know I could spend elsewhere, paying off my mortgage or saving or buying the things I want in life.
So what I'm curious about is, because you've been doing this for such a long time, and they say that practice makes perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So I reckon 30 years is a lot of practice.
Yes.
And that's a lot of time to be really perfect at something.
Mm-hmm.
So if we took that into consideration, I'm just wondering, with your high level of skill, Scott, what you would need to make perfect in stopping.
I don't know. I've tried to quit before and things like that, and just nothing really works for me.
Nothing really works. So is it? What was in the nothing? What did you do?
I've done the patches. I've tried to give up cold turkey. It's just I can't do it. It seems really, really hard.
Oh, it seems hard. So when you were younger, what did you do before you started smoking?
Well, I was very active and very physical as a child, and that's something I know that if I gave up smoking, I could start doing that again.
So what sort of physical activities did you do?
I played a lot of sport, which was great, something I can't do now, which I really miss.
Okay, so when you were playing sport, because it takes, we got 600 muscles in our body, right down from all the muscles that move our face, all the ones that control our shoulders and our legs and keep us upright so we're not on all fours. All of those muscles have been clever enough, and you've been clever enough to make them all work as a finely oiled machine, right? And what I'm curious about is what you did that got you smoking, that what you could change to get you not smoking.
Excellent. So good so far. What I want you to start doing now is pick any sport. Pick anything that has to be sport related. I like the way you've asked me about something because I can give you the theme. And I want you to give me an example. So give me an example of what maybe someone kicking a ball, what they have to go through, how we've got to revivify a learning strategy, but not necessarily outright apply it to smoking. We're going to have that be done indirectly for us.
Yep.
Okay, so let's see how you go. So down to the last detail. Maybe Erickson often talked about how someone catching a baseball and how they have to put certain pressure on the glove, they have to put their hand here and do this. We can almost turn that into something kicking a ball. Your background in martial arts might be learning how to punch a punching bag for the first time.
Yep.
All of these sorts of things.
Okay, so Scott, when you were playing sport, right? What did feel like when you grab the ball, right? And you heard behind you all of those people running to get that ball off you, right? And you knew that at that time you had to run away from them on a muddy field, right? Where you were hoping that the stops on the bottom of your footy boots would hold, right? And you could only take so many steps before you kicked the ball. And in kicking the ball, you would have to not look over your foot, because that's a snapshot of where you're going to end up, isn't it?
Yes.
So you've got to be able to have faith in you placing the ball in a position that when you let it go, it would fall onto the perfect spot on your foot and propel the ball so that all the guys that are running behind you are no longer after you, they're after the ball, or they've stopped in their tracks because you've kicked it so well. What I'm curious about is that you say it's so hard to get rid of something and you've tried everything, yet you've been in a situation where it was much more perilous, and yet you did it with ease. You did it to the level where the guys that were going to jump you for that ball were stopped dead in their tracks. How awesome is that?
Excellent. Beautiful job. So how was that for you?
Yeah, it really enhances what they've done as a person,
mm-hmm.
and makes that seem so much more difficult than the job they're actually trying to do.
Exactly. Now, what's interesting here, and I find the easier part, again, this is just the basic storytelling 101, is we're not saying things like this. We're not saying, now imagine yourself on the field. You are that person. You have caught the ball. You can hear this. You can feel that, because now it's too direct, because all it takes is for someone to say, well, that's not me, or I can't imagine.
Yeah.
So ideally what we're doing is they've set a context. They've come in, we've talked a little bit about smoking. They've set the boundaries of the session. Then through conversation, you start telling a story or explaining a scenario like you did so fluently. And there's a couple of thoughts that go on inside their head. Consciously, they'll be thinking, what is this guy talking about? And if they can't figure it out because you're not making the connection for them, they get overly confused. The unconscious mind thinks, well, he's telling a story for some reason because there's no coincidence in the world that I live. Maybe he's telling me something through this story that I better pay attention to. And that starts to connect. Now, if we take the metaphor of playing sport and break it down at a conscious level, what does someone get from playing sport? Well, there's achievement, there's physical activity, there's a connection with other people on the field, there's balance, there's learning how coordination, there's learning what it feels like to catch a ball and feel the ball, as you said, land on the perfect spot of the foot in order to kick it in the right direction. What else would there be?
There's a feeling of security when you see things change around you.
Yes.
That you were trying to run away from, and then all of a sudden they're not an issue anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I remember saying a long time ago, I'd rather be in the ring with somebody than on a footy field,
mm-hmm.
because I'm dealing with one idiot, not 18.
There you go.
Right? And when you're there with the ball and there's no more daylight,
yes.
You're in trouble.
There you go. So you've got to think of what the mental toll it takes to play a sport, on the mental toll it takes to put so much focus on balancing that bike so they don't fall over. how much focus is placed on drawing a line from top to bottom, then putting a couple of circles next to it and calling it a B for Bob. There's a lot of focus goes in on that, and there's a lot that's going on all at once. And that's what we're revivifying to our client. Our client saying, I can't quit smoking because it's difficult. But we're saying, well, you've been on a sporting field before, or you've ridden a bike before, or, well, you've just filled in my confidentiality form before we started this session, so I know you can read and write. The complexity of those tasks that we take for granted, because we're in the zone, we're in a trance when we're doing those things. It's all unconscious. So by revivifying something the unconscious mind has done for us, indirectly, the memory of it puts them back into trance. Now, the way Erickson would be sure that a trance would ensue would to get down, and this is a skill in itself, it takes a while to do this, is to have a play-by-play. Everything from balancing the pencil in the hand from the thumb to the forefinger, and then if you push down too hard, it'll probably break the pen or the pencil. If you don't do it hard enough, you won't see the lead through the paper. That you have to put the right balance from the thumb to the forefinger and the forefinger to the thumb. And it's different when you hold a pen in comparison to a pencil. All of these weird little details that we take for granted would overload our client and pull them right into the picture. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, something else he did that was very, very clever, just based on this, it has, I think, 2 indirect ticks in the box, if you will, was Erickson was fond of regressions. Erickson was fond of taking people back to childhood, letting them remember a skill, and then bringing it forward. That's a classical regression. Yep. So by telling a story about a child, he's laying what's called an unconscious marker. Now, this unconscious marker lets him know that if I talk about a child, your memory has to go back to you as a child. So I'm already doing a regression, but he's doing it through a story. So he might tell one story about a child learning how to write, another story that might involve a nursery rhyme, which is what we're told as a child, another learning experience of learning how to read, that's another childhood experience, another story about a child first learning who their best friend is, that's another child. So you're laying down unconscious marker of child. So when he does his formal induction, which is mixed into this story, people wonder why his clients went back to a child all the time. Well, he's reminded them and filled their mind up with so many childhood memories. How could they escape it?
Yeah.
It's like telling a client very, very scary stories, scary and painful scenarios, and you wonder why you have an abreaction every time.
Yeah.
You're setting up the trance to be full of all the things you talk about. So let's say we've got a client coming to stop smoking, and we're talking about sport and talking about in the minute details of kicking the ball, catching the ball, hitting the ball, bouncing the ball, whatever it is. We're also bringing to life some school experience, maybe in high school and primary school. So we can start to talk about those as well. We can start to talk about grand finals and things like that all involve around sport. They're the things we took for granted as a child because we knew nothing about hypnosis. But we're using that as an indirect way to say, well, you went through all of this. You've experienced so much in your life. Why can't we just have you take those lessons from back then that helped you cope at the time and just attach it to this thing you call a problem right now?
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering that, if you're running across a footy oval and it's really difficult and you got it to such a point where, the running was effortless.
Exactly. And
your breathing and, and your level of fitness, then I guess smoking would give you that same feeling as when you were a beginner.
Exactly.
But with your level of skill and, and competing in those games that, that were in the finals and the grand final, and seeing the guys sitting back there and you're 30 yards in front of them, that's like, seeing somebody that smokes.
Exactly.
They haven't got it. They haven't got the stamina. They haven't got the strength. They haven't got the endurance. None of that. And you've had that. You were there. So you know what it feels like, and you know exactly what it takes to get that.
So you see how all of those, do you see how, we break it down a story that you just give me right then, it's just based on little metaphors.
Yeah.
So when we're doing it indirectly and just what it sounds like just telling a story for the sake of telling a story, the unconscious mind views that as very purposeful. There's no mistake from the unconscious mind as far as, well, Michael just said this for this, I'm just going to ignore it. We know it's always listening. And we know if we're overloading with such detail, the conscious mind won't interfere. And this story that you're telling of kicking the ball or punching the punching bag for your sake as a martial arts instructor as well, and learning your katas and learning your kicks and your elbows and all that good stuff, the unconscious mind takes that as a cue of a lesson or a metaphor and starts to apply it to the context. If you dig deep enough into the context of a client saying, well, I'm a smoker and I can't lose weight, I can't do this, I can't do that, but now you're telling a metaphoric learning story, which is what it is, of how you probably had those same thoughts as a child when you first learned how to write, something that seems so difficult to do at the time, something you take for granted now. How the hell did you do that? How did you know to push through? How did you know what resources to rely on to actually spell your name? And now you're sitting in front of me saying you can't lose weight? You got to be kidding me. But if we join them to directly by saying, could you imagine being a child and learning how to write for the first time? It's probably the same way you're thinking about how you're going to quit smoking. Too direct.
Oh yeah, it's
Connects
just,
too
and
much.
it's too in your face.
It's too obvious. That obviousness allows the conscious mind to say yes or no. Being indirect and having your client say, what the hell is he talking about? And there's so much information I can't keep up. The conscious mind cannot deal with it, and the unconscious mind has to. It's a simple equation. Okay, so let's pick another one. Let's pick another story. Let's play with a child learning. Let's use the bike riding one. I think that's an important one. I want you to run me through just a scenario of a child learning how to ride a bike, what it might take, what they might think of, what they might experience, what they might feel, and get into as much detail as possible of that scenario.
Okay, so when you first get on a bike, you have to visually look at it, and normally most kids are watching somebody else, so they're sort of practicing in the air, and they're going, oh yeah, I'll hold it like this, and and I sit there, and then you get that build up, that anticipation of actually putting your leg over the seat while you're holding the handlebars, and right at that time you're balancing on one leg, and this thing feels like it's not very stable, and you put your other leg down, and that gives you a sense of assurance that you've got this, that you've got control of it. Now you're ready to take the next move. So you might push off with your foot and just feel how it rolls. And when you roll along with it a little bit, you start to feel that it can move left and right. And you get an understanding that if you look down, it plays havoc with your balance. So you've really got to look forward. But at the same time, you're looking back at your parents or your siblings, and they've got an astonished look on their face. Well, and you think to yourself, am I doing it right? Is something going to happen? Oh, wow, I'm doing this really well. And then you get the courage to make the decision to put one of your feet on the pedal. And then you've got another learning that when it's on the pedal, it can move. And did I put it on the pedal at the bottom, or do I have to unhook my foot and kick it round till it's up on top so I can push on it and make the bike go forwards? And then when that one's going forward, the other one's coming up, and then you've got to concentrate and try and lift this leg without upsetting your balance and get it on the pedal. And then as one goes around, the other one follows. And you're riding and you're moving. And now you've got to concentrate on what's coming up in front of you. Right? And do I look down? Oh no, if I look down, I'll lose my balance. And where's the road leading? I have to go to the left now. So my right arm is going forward and my left arm is coming back towards me. All of those things that have to take place, and you do them effortlessly. It's like it would take 100 years to write down all of those things that you did in a split second.
Excellent. A lot better already. So the whole purpose, like I said, is to revivify and put someone back into a memory. Now, if from that story they start drifting off into a memory, isn't that trance?
Oh, absolutely.
But you're getting away from the classical, which is, okay, close your eyes and relax and feel the chair underneath you because you're drifting and you're focusing and you're feeling this, and this, and that, and that, and that. You're now telling an indirect story that's allowing them to remember a memory of when they did it, which is going to bring up a lot of unconscious moments, especially if they connect and they had a great experience of writing or a great experience of reading or anything like that. You're creating a trance from the sake of an indirect story. And that's the genius of it. Now, this will create, and where a lot of hypnotists go wrong, is we try and connect. We try and connect everything we say to the session itself. So Erickson was under the understanding that if I've got context, if my client's listening, I can say anything and they'll connect to the context because they'll be thinking, why is he telling this or why is that occurring? It must be all part of this, unconsciously, of course. So it comes back to having that confidence in yourself, even just telling the classical storytelling process of I can say any story or tell any story and believe that my client will connect to it. And I'll know if they connect to it because I'll see unconscious moments or hear them. It's the same thing with this learning strategy. It is still a story, but is implying a learning lesson inside of it. Now, to get obvious again is when we start saying, you know, all of these things happen at once. And I wonder how you learning how to ride a bike back then could help you quit smoking. Too much. Erickson wouldn't even bring attention to why they're there. He'd stop talking about it. You'd probably never hear him say the word smoke again.
Well, I'm not interested in what they've come in for because really it's probably something else.
Of course it is.
It's, you know, and yeah, they might only want to get that fixed, but the unconscious moments will jump out at you. Yeah. And when you explore them, that'll give you the guts of what you need to work on or what they're trying to work on because it's come out unconsciously.
Exactly. The context of your session will enable your client to connect. If you just start telling a story before you investigate the problem, as it were, it can be a little bit difficult. But if you just talk about the problem for a little bit at the start or have an understanding of why they're there, and then you start telling an offhanded story, then you get back to the quote-unquote the real session, then tell another story, all those stories now can be put strategically to allow a client to connect to the story or feel what that memory did for them back then, which will help them, which will help fuel the change when they finally drop into that trance. And that's the genius of it, was to bring back something old and make it new again, rather than bring in something new and hope it's the right new.
Yep.
Now, either way can work and you have to adjust accordingly. But if you're fond of telling stories, why not tell a story now that has in it a learning lesson of overcoming, a learning lesson of success, a learning lesson of pride, a learning lesson of problem solving on the spot, a learning lesson of keeping yourself out of danger, a learning lesson of smelling, hearing, or feeling, anything like that, and saying, hey, you've done all these things before. The unconscious mind had to have figured out what all of this is to make sense of it. Why not allow the unconscious mind to make sense of this completely again? Big difference.
Yeah.
Any questions from that, just as a start for this advanced Ericksonian training, or just these ideas are always going to be principles?
No, I love it. I love it because I'm thinking about successes I've had.
Yeah.
And moments with clients, and I thought, damn, that's just what I did.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you, unconscious mind.
Yeah. Now, if you think back to somebody who has told you a story before and you've started to drift in and out, they weren't doing anything hypnotic. They were just overloading you with information. Sometimes you cared about it, sometimes you didn't. Sometimes they were saying stuff to you, and this has happened on many occasions, and you probably had it yourself. Someone will start telling a story or telling their experience, and that's all stories are, just expressing experiences, and you start laughing about something else.
Yeah.
Just because your own memory popped in and you forgot about it, and it somehow was revivified from a suggestion in the story that was given to you indirectly, and you start laughing, and someone says, what are you laughing about? And you say, oh, I can't remember, or oh, it doesn't matter, I was just thinking about something else. That suggestion of the suggestions were given to you indirectly through a story, which made you think about something else and have that little experience. All from a conversation. That's the power of it.
Oh, yeah. It's why we do what we do.
Exactly. So I'm going to leave you with that to marinate. Next time we'll start to play with a little bit more strategically and we can start to put these little lessons everywhere. But that's the foundation of this learning lesson, or these learning stories. Now, Ben, I wanted to bring this up now because you are an avid storyteller. This should give you, or start to give you, a new insight into how a story can be told. We're not there yet, but this gives you the basics and the structure of what we can play with, and we can start to refine